Hellhounds, chase ghosts, come sleep, watch out, demons are coming, run, sleep, hide, spirits, ghosts, hide, demons, hellhounds, ghosts, demons are coming, spirits, ghosts.
Welcome home, my little hellhounds. Tonight we have 5 scary stories to sink our hellish teeth into. If you have any scary stories you want narrated on the channel, then submit them to Reddit r/homeofscares and follow me on Twitter at homeofscares. Also, if you like this content, then don't forget to subscribe and click the like button, as this really helps the channel. And don't forget to click that bell icon so you get notified every time I upload. Now, let's get right into it. My family's experience with Mrs Lorraine Warren, posted by Charizard the Blue. So, they lived in Connecticut, and it's where I grew up. This happened when I was like 14. It was either right after Ed Warren passed away, or not too long after. Me and my dad were staying at my aunt's house one night. It was a 2-family house, so her and my uncle, as well as my cousin, her husband, and their 2 children all lived there. It was a new house they had just built and moved into a couple of months back. I found this part out later. Leading up to that night, my aunt was having crazy dreams, where a little boy would appear in her dreams every night. Or so she thought they were dreams, and led her out of bed. My aunt said that outside of the house was a very bright light that shone through the windows to the point where she couldn't see anything outside, and the little boy would try to lead her outside. My aunt would always be found in the morning by my uncle around the house, passed out on the bathroom floor, living room, even the garage one time. They assumed my aunt was sleepwalking. So anyway, that night, at about 2 a.m. or so, everyone hears this loud screaming coming from the upstairs living room. Me, my dad, my aunt, and uncle all wake up and run upstairs because it sounded like someone was hurt. We get up there and my cousin and her husband are in the living room, and my cousin's son, who was about 2 years younger than me, was sitting in a rocking chair. His back was to us. But my cousin and husband were freaking out, so my dad and uncle walked over to my cousin and went to see what was wrong. My uncle touched his shoulder and he turned his head around, and it was bright red. His eyes were bloodshot and his skin was starting to turn this weird greyish colour. When they tried asking him what was wrong, he started speaking in Latin and was rocking in the chair back and forth. Now, he was known as kind of a prankster, so my uncle and my cousin's husband, thinking he's playing around, yelled at him to stop and went to grab him out of the chair. When they touched him, that time he let out a loud scream again in Latin, and his eyes started to roll in the back of his head. We are all freaking out at this point, not knowing what to do. My cousin went and got a glass of water, thinking maybe he's sleepwalking, and threw it on him, and he just laughed in this deep voice. My aunt was a pretty holy woman. She would keep crosses and angel statues and even holy water in the house, so she ran back downstairs to get the holy water, because at this point we realised something weird was going on. My dad and my uncle grabbed him out of the chair. He was kicking and trying to fight them the whole time, and held him on the floor. My aunt brings over the holy water and rubs it on her hands. My cousin lifts up his shirt while he's being held down, and my aunt places her hand on his back. It literally burned him. It left a burn mark the exact size of her hand on his back. He screamed and screamed for a couple of seconds before he ended up passing out. I'm just standing there the whole time, absolutely terrified, not moving, just watching all this happen. So he's passed out, and not knowing what to do, they call the police. It's probably around 3 AM at this point. So the police come with paramedics and talk to us all, and the meds check out my second cousin to see if he's okay. He ended up waking up, and they said he was fine, save the burn mark on his back. Not knowing what to do, the police recommended that they give Mrs Warren a call, since she was a famous paranormal investigator and lived right in CT. So nobody ends up going to bed at all, and me and my dad leave in the later morning. Now this next part I wasn't there for. About a week later, my aunt gives Mrs Warren a call, tells her what happened, and invites her to the house. Apparently, Lorraine knew what the house was about before she even stepped foot in there. Apparently, the newly built house was built on land that housed some kind of portal to the other dimension. The little boy in my aunt's dream was trying to lead my aunt outside through the portal, because if a human entered the portal, it would be open enough for demons to constantly go through. Apparently, one got through and was able to possess my second cousin, because he wasn't strong enough to fight it. Well, Lorraine ends up doing this whole seance and cleansing of the house to get rid of it all and close it permanently. They ended up living in that house for about another 8 years without any problems ever again, before selling it and moving out of state. I never stayed over there again. To this day, that night still haunts me. I believe I know what happens when you die. On 3/16/2015, I was released from prison for the last time. It's what everybody call 12/12, and if you've been to prison or jail before, you know what that means. But for everybody who's never been, or knows anyone that's been, it's when you finish everything. No more probation or parole. No more being on a run when you don't follow the rules or decide to get high, or just stop reporting in to your parole officer. 12/12 means that you're 100% a free man, free to do anything you want to do and go anywhere you want to go. You're literally reborn again. If you've ever gotten your freedom taken away, you'll understand my next statement. Finally getting your freedom back feels better than sex. no debate. But know that it feels good as hell. Anyway, I was released from prison and I had to go back to my hometown, St. Louis, Missouri, because that's where the closest Greyhound station was, and I was finally able to go back home to my family in Springfield, Missouri, and my first and only son, who was 3 at the time, my stepdaughter and baby mama, who I haven't seen for almost 3 years, because I went back to prison in 2013, and after getting out I was forced to go back to St. Louis Honor Center because she moved to Illinois and they don't home plan people to out-of-state residents. While in St. Louis Honor Center, I no longer had family or friends' houses to go to on weekends past because everybody either moved away or died since I had been gone, so I had nowhere to go but downtown St. Louis, where the Honor Center was located, and I quickly learned where everybody be and started using what they was using, K2 or Spice. Now, all that said, let me get to the story. After getting released, I ended up back downtown because, like I said, that's where the Greyhound stations were at, and since I had close to 5 to 6 hours to waste before the bus leaves, I decided to go around the corner to the old stomping grounds to see what's going on. But when I got there, nobody was out, like it was a ghost town. So I decided to head back to the Greyhound station, but as I turned around, I see my dude, D-Man, rolling up, and when he seen me, his face lit up and gave me a big bear hug, and then praised me on how good I look now that I'm not on all of them drugs. After a brief conversation, he started telling me about he's the man around there and got the best crack and K2 in town. As we walked to the library where everybody be now, not in the library but around it, while everybody sells whatever drugs they've got, I let him know that I'm finally going back home to Springfield and we might not see each other ever again, and he decided to roll a big joint of K2 to take away the pain and hurt of losing a good friend and for better days to come. I know, crazy, right? And also noticed that I haven't smoked or got high for a long time, so I still had virgin lungs and my tolerance was low. So we smoke, and while we're smoking, other people started coming up to buy crack and K2. The ones buying K2 fired up, and we started passing joints around like we were at Snoop Dogg's smokehouse, and all I can remember is me starting to throw up like crazy and thinking, fuck, I'm fin to die. And then everything went black, and then like somebody pushed fast forward and I seen everything I ever done or thought in my life go by with incredible speed, and then I ended up in a parking lot trying to break in somebody's car, and then the person whose car it was there with a gun, and then he shot me in the head. I seen the spark of the gun, felt the pain, and then everything went black. I came to in the darkest place I ever seen. I mean, the darkest of the darkest, and I couldn't see anything, but I could hear myself think. I could talk, but only in my mind. Where am I? Am I dead? What's happened? Oh God, Is this all I'm going to see for the rest of my days? I can see my hands. Oh God, Lord, please don't let this be. Is this hell? What's happened? Okay, think. What's the last thing you remember? While trying to remember, I remembered my past life, everything I'd done and said, everything I thought, and every crime I committed. But for the life of me, I couldn't remember what got me here. Then it hit me. Prison. Getting released. D-man. Okay, what else? What? I remember now. Throwing up bad. And I'm thinking I'm gonna die. Springfield. Son. Did I ever see my son again? Did I ever go back to Springfield? See my baby mama, stepdaughter? Then it hit me. I got shot in the head. For trying to steal somebody's car. Why was I trying to steal somebody's car? Better yet, why was I still in St. Louis? Why I didn't get on the Greyhound bus? My son. Oh God, I will never see my son again. The whole time I was thinking these things, I couldn't see nothing but blackness. But my thoughts of my son finally brought me back to reality. And I was standing on the curb, still throwing up on myself. I decided to just walk to the Greyhound, but D-Man put his hands on my shoulder and told me to sit down. Just then the ambulance pulled up. Somebody called, but I don't want to go. But D-Man told me to go and get checked out, so I did. On the way to the hospital, I needed to throw up some more, so they gave me the throw up bag. I threw up the whole ride there. After getting to the hospital, I told the doctor the truth about smoking K2, and after giving me the "you know you shouldn't be doing that" speech, they ran their tests and let me go after everything checked out. Before leaving, I took my pants off and washed off the throw up with paper towels, and eventually made my way to the Greyhound station. And even though I still had a lot of hours to wait, I didn't go back around the corner and stayed put. Eventually the bus came and I gave my ticket and got on the bus. The whole ride there, I had to keep running into the bathroom to throw up. But finally, after 5 hours, I made it. You would think after that incident that my K2 days were over. Wrong. But something really scary finally happened that made me stop for good. And now, you can't pay me to smoke that shit. No good. Let me know if you want to hear what happened. Until then, thanks for reading. Mara. Posted by Bloody Spaghetti. We met nearly 3 years ago. It was love at first sight. The moment we laid eyes on each other, we knew, I knew, this is it. This is the one. She knew it too. She knew the universe had intended for us to be with each other, as did I. I saw it in her cold blue eyes. They lit up. An icy fire burned in them. One thing led to another, and we were in each other's arms. It was nothing like I had experienced before. The spark of passion kept us glued to one another. We couldn't keep our hands away from one another. Sparks flew, clothes flew. Bodily, we spilled fluids all over. It was the best sex I ever had. I didn't even know her name. I didn't care. She didn't care either. It was as if we were solely interested in fucking the life out of one another. We didn't exchange names until the 7th night of rapid copulation. Mara. Her name is Mara. This was just the beginning. We met every night, and only at night. She came over to my small apartment every single night right after sunset. Her red dresses danced around her pale skin as she stood at the frame of my bedroom. She was enticingly beautiful and full of sexual charm. Her long dark hair flowed like black flames, swaying softly between her slender fingers. She always left in the morning, and I never bothered asking why. We hardly ever spoke with words. It was always moaning, sighs, cries, screams of pleasure mixed with pain, and even shrieks of ecstatic agony. Every night when she was with me, I felt invincible. I felt like a god among men. Whenever night gave way to morning and she left my bed, I felt drained, exhausted, sucked dry, completely spent. About a month after our initial interaction, I noticed something about myself. A cough. It wouldn't go away during the day. I'd suffer from terrible bouts of coughing. It was painful, violent. My bronchioles and lungs would crack and rasp because of an assault by mysterious irritants. When Mara would come for another round of lovemaking though, the coughing would disappear and I'd feel like this Herculean strength and vigour once more. Over time, my cough got worse. Dry coughing turned wet and mucusal. Fatigue took over my days. I became constantly exhausted, beyond what was normal for me, too lethargic to get out of bed. I'd gas out, doing nothing. Dizziness and fevers started taking control of my daily routines. My appetite had all but disappeared. I barely ate, I barely did anything. My body was slowly consuming itself from the inside. None of that persisted with nightfall. I started living solely for the nights. Mara would come and take me to a world full of ecstasy. The moment her icy hands ran across my chest, a fire burned inside of my heart, reigniting my life. Her lust was keeping me alive. Her lust was keeping me sane. The feeling of her saliva travelling down my pipes is exhilarating. The thrill I get whenever our bodies connect. Merely seeing the radiance of that woman, the goddess of mine, was enough to induce a mental pleasure equal to an orgasm. The first time I coughed blood was right before nightfall, right before she showed up. A fire cruised across as she crawled on top of me, pinning me down, her eyes interlocked with mine, and she licked the fresh blood right off my dry lips. Oh God, the feeling that gave me, indescribable, a mixture of ice and fire. Terrible crackling pain in my chest, mind-bending orgasmic sensation down below. As time passed, I became consumed by my illness. I became a pathetic husk of a man. Whenever my woman, my Mara, wasn't around, a blood-spitting parody of Prometheus chained to his bed, punished by God for his sinful love for an angelic being. In her presence, I am Adonis personified. However, I am nearly completely immobile when the rays of the sun violate the sanctity of my room. When the moonlight wrestles control from the sun, however, I feel alive again. As time passed, I felt myself shrivel down, shrink and dry out under the weight of Earth's gravity. Mara grew more and more radiant with each passing night. Her beauty is unmatched. She is perfection. Nowadays, I barely do anything. I can hardly get out of my bed. She takes control of everything. I just enjoy the experience. I can't do much. My body's too weak. I'm just glad she still wants me. I fear the end is near. I fear that I have died once underneath her. I saw the bright light. I heard angels singing. I felt myself rising out of my burning body. I felt the pain go away. Unearthly calm surrounded me. She pulled me back to this world. Coming back down hurt so badly. I screamed, as if some sort of malevolent force was trying to tear my heart out. I thrashed and withered beneath Mara, overcome by the infernal agony that burned my torso. Dust spilled out of my throat, and white-hot knives penetrated my lungs. For a moment I couldn't see Mara. She wasn't there anymore. I was all alone. I was all alone in the cold, unforgiving darkness. There was nothing at all, just the moon and I. My chest seized up as I pulled myself into a sitting position, calling out my lover's name. A lump grew at the base of the neck, slowly suffocating me before forcing itself out of my mouth. A bloody lump of mucosal matter. Fear slowly replaced the pain. A paralysing thunderbolt travelled across every nerve. It had paralysed me as my heartbeat sounded more and more like demon drums pounding inside of my head. I felt the urge to scream Mara's name into the abyss, but only a gurgle came out. I fell to my bed as the chills of my feverish muscles released me from the paralysing effects of my paranoia. My eyes felt heavy, so I closed them. My mind started going blank. Everything was turning completely dark and cold, as if I was falling into a black hole. It wasn't the feeling of falling asleep. There was something different about it, something darker. Another tease of the Grim Reaper, perhaps. The pleasant sensation of her cold skin rubbing against my burning body caressed my mind. I let out a sigh of relief. I was too sore to even open my eyes to look at her. I was just glad my angelic lover was back. Her presence washed away all the pain and all the torment. She had replaced all of that with heavenly orgasmic pleasure. The moment I felt her force me inside of her again. Her love is truly to die for. I didn't touch her. Posted by Erucius. I don't understand how it's come to this. I've been expelled from school. I've lost the few friends I had. My own parents won't even look at me now. And all because of her. Her. Even now I can't find it in me to hate her. I love her, despite what she's done to me, and I think I always will. For so many years, she's been my reason to get up in the morning and the last thing I think about before I go to bed. Lisa, my soulmate. I was never what you would call a popular kid from kindergarten to high school. I was a fat, shy boy who just wanted to learn. I didn't want to cause trouble, and I certainly didn't want to get in trouble. I mostly floated through life like dandelion puffs on a breeze. In my kindergarten class, she was this lovely creature with soft blonde hair and a face made for smiles, and even as a child I knew she was beautiful. She found friends easily, teachers loved her easy smiles and confident ways, and boys who would still think girls were gross for many years to come were forced to recognise her attraction. She was the belle of the ball, and our worlds could not have been more different. I was what you would call a fat child. My weight and desire for friendship made me the constant butt of any joke, or the odd man out of any activity. Lisa sat in front of me alphabetically. Our names are very close, and she became my secret obsession. I would sit behind her and breathe in the scent of her hair and bask in the glow of her beauty, as she became my respite in a sea of horror. I would often pretend I was in her group of friends, privy to their secrets and a part of their oh so enticing world. I would create conversations and lunch dates and feed my imagination with thoughts of our friendship. Our make-believe friendship was more real to me than my own life, and as the years went on, it became more of an obsession than a daydream. I drew pictures of our time together, wrote poems about her beauty, and filled books with our love stories. I didn't have friends, not real friends at least. Lisa was all I had. The trouble began in high school. Lisa was brilliant, always at the top of our class, but I outshone her most of the time when it came to matters academic. Lisa's one stumbling point was mathematics. She had never found math as easy as, say, English or biology, and it became a megrim for her. I would have offered to tutor her, but the gulf between us had only become wider the older we got. She was a cheerleader and a member of the student council and secretary for the glee club, and I was just me, the fat boy who had grown into an overweight teenager who sat at the chess club or debate team and wished I was close to her. When Mr. Sturgis asked us both to stay after class, I never dreamed that he would assign me as her tutor. "You need help, Lisa," he said, "and Reggie is the best math student I've had in a long time. I think with Reggie's help that you can pass algebra," he finished. I could kiss him. Lisa agreed, though hesitantly, and that afternoon we met in the library to begin her tutoring session. I could barely pay attention to what I was doing as this goddess sat beside me and asked me for help on what was really no big deal. I showed her the shortcuts, the workaround, and the theories that would make it easy for her to succeed. She got a B on her next test, and I couldn't have been prouder. It wasn't long before our study sessions began leaving the library. She met me at the public library a few times, but one day my greatest dreams came true. As I left math class, she hands me a folded piece of paper and says to meet her there after cheerleading practice. Then she just flipped her hair and smiled at me as she strode off on Goddess's legs and said, "See you then." The address was her home address. From then on, we always met at her house in the late afternoon. Her parents were surprisingly accepting of a teenage boy in their house, and I rapidly became as fond of them as I was of her. Her father was an architect, and if I arrived before Lisa, he was always taking me into his study to show me his latest blueprints. Her mother was a lawyer, but after a lengthy lawsuit against the firm she'd once been with, she had won enough money to stay at home and look after her family. Working from home as a legal consultant meant she often had time to bake, and her home was always full of smells of bread or pie or other culinary delights. The time I spent in Lisa's house was the best time of my life, as algebra became geometry and calculus. She always came back to her study buddy. I found easier ways to teach her what she needed to know to pass, and she turned out to be a quick study once she found someone to speak her language. As we entered our senior year, I never quite asked why she still refused to acknowledge me in the hallways, or why her friends still picked on me ceaselessly. I was just happy to be by her, be around her, and be part of her world. One night, after helping her through a particularly difficult bit of calculus, she whooped with joy and turned to plant a kiss on my surprised lips. She broke the kiss in less than an instant, but it felt to me as though her lips touched mine for years. I could have floated home that night, and as I settled into bed, I knew what I had to do the next day. I would tell her how I felt, how I'd always felt, and ask her to accompany me to the upcoming spring dance. She liked me, and we liked being around each other. What could go wrong? I went to her locker the next morning and found her there with only a single friend around her. Rebecca Jenner, the friend in question, sneered a little as I approached, and when Lisa turned, I somehow failed to notice the furtive look she cast around before giving me a half-hearted smile. It's only in hindsight of time that I see my mistake. I approached her as an equal. I approached her in the open. I approached her in her element. I surprised her somewhere she felt safe. I poured out my heart to her right then and there, and by the end a crowd had gathered around us. Some were snickering, and some were right out mocking me, but the mocking wasn't reserved for me this time. Looking back, I could already hear the whispered voices of Lisa's peers as they began formulating the gossip. Lisa has a thing for pudgy nerds. Looks like Lisa would rather hold hands with pimple-faced dweebs than go out with football players. Ooh, sounds like Lisa had a lot of fun at their study sessions. And so forth. I didn't care at the time though. I was pouring my heart out to the girl I loved, and that was all that mattered. She was crying by the time I was done. Her face was beet red, and her tear-clouded eyes were scanning around for an escape. Finally, she pushed past me, sending me sprawling to the linoleum floor, and made me a breakthrough into the crowd. I tried to go after her, but the crowd closed in on me, and the torrent of questions and accusations assaulted me. Where had I fucked her? How long before Brad kicked my ass? Was I so stupid to think I was anything but a charity case? On and on and on, until finally I found an outlet and went tearing towards the boys' room. I hid there all through the first period and tried my best to keep my head down for the rest of the day. I didn't see Lisa that day. I didn't see her the next day either, but I heard the rumours about Lisa and her fat little boyfriend, Lisa and her study sessions with me, and all the rumours about how Brad was looking for me so he could kick my ass up around my ears. Bradley Davies and I didn't have any classes together, luckily for me, but he still found me. He and his friends came across to me in the bathroom near the end of the second day and backed me up against the cold wall of the boys' room. They hit me a few times, Brad and Chuck and Gail, and as they took turns hitting me, Brad let me know the score. You stay away from my girlfriend, you little faggot. Do you hear me? I didn't mind her keeping a little nerd pet, so long as she still got to cheer and I still got to squeeze into her whenever I wanted. This comment elicited some laughs and slaps from his friends, but that's over now. She's mine, and I'm not okay with your lost puppy act anymore. I see you around Lisa again, and you're a dead nerd. He punctuated this point by slamming his fist into my cheek, hard enough to knock my glasses into the sink, where the lenses shattered against the porcelain. As I lay on the bathroom floor, I thought this was as low as I could get. I was wrong. When I came to school the next day, something had changed. I had been the target of constant teasing for the last 2 days, but the reception I got this morning was icy. People whispered behind angry faces, and all the anger was directed at me. What had I done to deserve such scorn? I was the victim here, right? Brad had beaten the crap out of me, and Lisa had refused to even talk to me for 3 days. What could I have done? The answer came in homeroom. A police officer was waiting to take me to the office where Lisa's parents, my parents, and the principal were waiting to talk to me. My confusion turned to fear at this, but confusion would make a lot more reappearances that day. The principal invited me to take a seat. My mother was crying, and my father's eyes bore into me like a power drill. I looked at Lisa's parents for some explanation, but they both made it very clear that they wanted nothing to do with me. Lisa had posted a message on Facebook this morning. She had told all her friends about how I had forced myself on her during our study sessions and made her do things that I won't even mention here. My depravity knew no limits, and all the while I had convinced her parents that I was a fine young man and a model student. I had convinced everyone of this, she went on, but in reality I was a pervert. And when I talked to her at school, talked to her like we were equals, she had finally found the strength to speak out about my depravity. She had told her parents after that, and they had called my parents to let them know what their little boy was capable of. Someone had called the police at some point. It was never made clear who, and that's how we'd come to this point. I won't bore you with the details. My parents and I became the town's black spot for the next 3 months as I took polygraph tests and physiological evaluations and protested my innocence at every turn. The police claimed they had a rape kit that tested positive for something, but the absence of semen was confronted with my obvious intellect. Why would he be sloppy enough to leave evidence? One officer asked, looking at me as though I was the lowest form of life. The case against me was eventually thrown out due to lack of evidence, but it hardly mattered. I had been accused of rape, and any bright future I might have had slipped out of my grip. It didn't matter how good my grades were, how high my scores were, or how many testimonials I had written by teachers who believed that I was innocent. No college wanted an accused rapist in their school, and I slumped slowly into depression. Why had she done this? Why had she ruined my life? All I had done was love her. All I had done was tell her how I felt. All she had done in return was ruin me. Though, and that's what's brought me here. I'm in her bedroom now, looking over my handiwork. I had heard her parents would be out of town, and Lisa was going to have a party Saturday night. I wasn't invited, of course. Since the incident, I haven't even been back to school, but I seem to remember where the house was and how breakable the back door is. The rock made a lot of noise as it smashed through the glass, but no one was there to hear it. For rich, intellectual people, her parents certainly have a lot of faith in humanity. I had never seen a security panel or even a surveillance camera on the property, so getting in undetected was easy. I hid in the big walk-in closet that holds all her lovely clothes and waited for her to come home from school. Her door swung open at 4:15, and imagine my surprise as she and Brad fell onto bed in a writhing pile of teenage spirit. Some would have seen this as an obstacle, but to me it was just another opportunity. I waited till they were well in the throes of passion before sneaking from the closet and coming up behind him. He made quite a sight there, his bare ass moving as he worked inside her. She on her knees to receive him, and neither of them saw their death approach. He garbled out something as I cut his throat, but she didn't even notice until he slipped out of her. The begging starting then. The begging and the screaming. She kept shouting his name, begging me not to, and I implored her to be as loud as she wanted. I wanted the neighbours to know what was going on. I wanted them to know how Brad had brutally murdered his girlfriend in a fit of teenage aggression before cutting his own throat out of a sense of regret. I'm pretty sure I snapped the knife off in her sternum after the 15th or 16th downward stab, but by then she had stopped screaming. The knife is in his hands now. I was smart enough to wear gloves, and I already have my escape route planned out. You see, I may have never touched her, but that didn't stop me from killing her. Dog on the street, posted by Risto Sturt. Jake woke up in the absence of a woman's body next to him. As he came out of sleep, he extended his hand reaching for Debbie's soft, fair hair and the smooth skin of her back, but his hand touched only mattress and the bedsheet. It was still warm, and it smelled of her. He didn't need to sniff too hard. However, she wasn't there. She had probably gotten up to take her morning piss and get ready for work. Wait, the clock on Jake's bedside table wrote 5:30. It wasn't even time to get to work yet. The sun must have barely began to turn up, if it was anyone else. Jake would have assumed she was up to take a piss and then tuck herself back into sleep again right after. But this couldn't be the case with Debbie. This girl wouldn't get out of bed earlier if it wasn't a life or death situation. She wouldn't get up until it was time for work o'clock, not a single minute earlier, let alone getting up to go to the toilet. Her oversleeping habit was the reason for getting to work late at least 5 times a month. One day back in February, she nearly got herself fired for those 5 more minutes. Baby, please. Jake stepped out on the cold tile floor, stretched his arms and his legs until he looked like crucified Jesus without the cross. Some of his joints popped. With eyes still half shut, he walked sluggishly to the corridor which led him to the living room. Baby, he mumbled. As Jake walked down the corridor, he was surprised to see some dim natural light illuminating the furniture of the living room in front of him. Where did the light come from? He thought. Did I forget to shut the shutters last night? Maybe Debbie opened them. What is she doing up this early anyway? But as Jack trod into the living room, he was surprised to see that the light came from another source. The front door was open, and a breeze caressed his face as he looked out. What the hell? Outside, he could see the tiny front yard and the empty morning street. The light was faint, and the street lights of the night had been switched off. As he approached slowly the front door to take a look outside with his baffled eyes, something made him jump out of his flip-flops. A horrible shriek penetrated his ears and even made the skin on his forehead shiver. The scream stretched long and inspired gradually more and more agony as it went. Then it stopped. It had sounded like it came from down the street. Jake stepped out of the front door and ran the short gravel path across his front yard. Then he saw it. He saw her. Debbie stood about 20 yards away, right next to Mrs Dundridge's house, and Jake blinked and he felt his heart skip a dozen beats. Debbie was completely naked in the same way she had fallen asleep last night next to him, right after their usual Thursday night humping. She hadn't put anything on since then, but there was something else that made Jake feel like this either was an insane nightmare, or it was the proof that he had actually lost his damn sanity for some reason. Debbie was not only naked on the asphalt, but also standing on all fours like a goddamn animal. Jake's heart picked up again, but his mind was still a long shot from rationality. He just stood there in the middle of the street, looking at her. Debbie turned towards him and looked him in the eyes. She screamed again, this time louder, with more agony than before. She didn't take her eyes off him as she did, and Jake could hear the vocal cords in her throat aching, burning, the eyes above bulging. Her scream died abruptly as Mrs Dundridge opened the front door and walked down her lawn. With an old hunting rifle in her hands, she shot Debbie in the ribs of her right side, and Debbie crashed her head on the asphalt with her tongue sticking out like a dead dog. And that's it for tonight, my little hellhounds. Thanks for listening. If you liked this content, then please subscribe and click the like button. If you have any scary stories you want narrated on the channel, then submit them to Reddit r/homeofscares and follow me on Twitter at homeofscares. Now, good night, my little hellhounds.